my pleasure to introduce our next keynote speakers, Log Nation's Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering and Force Protection, Lieutenant General Tom Miller, and the Senior Enlisted Leader for the Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering and Force Protection, Chief Master Sergeant Robert Barrier. A University of Texas alum, Lieutenant General Miller joined the United States Air Force as an aircraft maintenance officer. His command experience includes the 455th Expeditionary Maintenance Group at Bagram, the 377th Air Base Wing in Kirtland, the Oklahoma City Air Logistics Complex at Tinker, and the Air Force Sustainment Center at Tinker. His assignments also included the Joint Staff and Logistics and as the A4 for ACC. Chief Master Sergeant Barrier, as the Principal Enlisted Advisor for the A4, guides policy formulation, planning, force development, and the installation sustainment for more than 370 total force personnel, supporting over 240,000 airmen across a portfolio worth more than $46 billion. Please welcome Lieutenant General Miller and Chief Master Sergeant Barrier for their keynote address on the state of logistics.
Good morning, everybody. Log Nation, it is great to see it. Well, almost see it with the lights in my eyes. But, think about this morning. We'll talk about it more this week, but the program that Jay and the entire LOA team has put on for you is world-class. Starting with the COCOM commander that has the global logistics responsibility as your kickoff speaker. So to talk to a COCOM commander and describe logistics is important. To have the COCOM commander that owns the global logistics enterprise and responsibility to all COCOMs across the globe as your keynote to kick off is absolutely remarkable. Very excited to be here with you this morning, and I know there's standing room. If you're standing and there's seats, if there's a seat near you, can you raise your hand just so that somebody can come and have a seat? There's some hands up there, so don't be shy. Come on in. Chief Barrier and I are thrilled this morning to talk to you a little bit about where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going. A lot happens in just 1 year. A lot happens in your personal life, a lot happens in your professional life. Since this time last year, the Secretary of the Air Force made an announcement on how we're going to re-optimize the Air Force for great power competition. To quote him directly, he described, "We are out of time." I can tell you, being in a lot of personal contact time with him on this subject, he believes that to the core of his bones. He has seen the data. It is an informed decision that he's making. And when he says we are out of time, it's based on the facts. The Chief of Staff delivered a document called The Case for Change. That was published at AFA. There's a PDF copy that you should have. Everybody in this room really needs to read that. And the reason I say that is there's context in there. We'll talk a little bit about that this morning, but that context is important, not just for you to personally understand, but why are you here? You're here to professionally develop. And for you to lead airmen effectively in your unit, whether you're a flight commander and you've got 50 to 80 to 150 people, you're a squadron commander and you're in the hundreds, or beyond that, in the thousands, being able to describe why really matters. It matters to you personally, but it matters when you communicate with your airmen. In that document, and as you are not new to this subject, the security environment has changed. The People's Republic of China is arguably the most formidable competitor this nation's ever had. It is the pacing threat. Combination of economic, military, and informational space is different, significantly different than what the Soviet Union had at its height. And the PRC has been developing capabilities specifically to counter US capabilities, which put air power and logistics at risk. The situation would be complicated with the PRC alone, and that is the pacing threat. But think about it for a second. Think about our world. And General Van Ovost hit the complexity of the world we're living in really well. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, bringing war back to the continent of Europe at a scale that many thought would never happen again, and it's happened. A belligerent Iran waging proxy wars against free trade allies and very consequentially killing Americans. This is all in one time space. And then Hamas's attack on Israel, the war between the two, and the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing play out right now. That juxtaposed with the Kim regime in North Korea, this all turns into a really unstable environment. And so what do you do? What do you need to do in an unstable environment? You need to plan and have discipline with your plan. Now, you can't predict with 100% what's going to happen in the future. And if you think back in time, no matter how long you've been doing this, whether it's, I love seeing lieutenants here, whether you're a second lieutenant and you're less than 24 months into your active duty service in the Air Force, or you're one of the people who's mentored me since I was really young, either one of those swaths, think about how much has changed just in your time in service. There's 250,000 less airmen on active duty than the day I got commissioned. That's a remarkable change. In our environment, and I could not have predicted so I was concerned about the Soviet Union when I was in Air Force ROTC, thinking, hey, this Soviet Union, that'll be the thing that the US is most concerned about. For the last 34 years, that hasn't been the thing that we've been concerned about. The world changed, and the Air Force changed with it. So the global security environment that we have and war has changed. Well, so in what way? Precision strike, the cost threshold for that has lowered. Look at the drones in Ukraine. Look at the drone technology and the low cost threshold and the high cost to counter it that we're seeing across the globe. Just like stealth changed the nature of war, precision weapons changed it. low-cost, attritable weapon systems that lower the bar, frankly, for the cost of entering conflict has dramatically changed the environment we're in. And the speed and volume of this globally, it's increased exponentially. So the wars that have happened between great powers in our history, easy to look at World War I, especially think of World War II. But now they would occur at unprecedented pace. And the competitors are nuclear capable. It changes the environment that we live in, and it changes what we need to do to prepare for it. So as we think about those arsenals, both conventional and nuclear, that competitors have, we have to think about what comes next. The chief said we are serving in a time of consequence. And I'm sure he chooses his words carefully. And that time of consequence characterization just really resonated with me the first time I heard him say it. I heard him say it in private before he publicly announced it that way. And it gave the people that were in the room with him pause, reflecting on everything we're talking about this morning. The global landscape changes. The complexity changes. You can't just focus on one thing. And as great powers change in technology and all of that swirls around us, what will we do? The Air Force has a rich history of stepping up and reckoning with transformational change. Since our inception in 1947, we've consistently evolved. When the situation changed, we changed as an Air Force. The dynamics changed at key inflection points in history. We recognized that as a force, and we made the change that was necessary. At every point, there were air power leaders like you in this room that saw what was happening and made a decision and took the Air Force in a different direction. The world has become very reliant on American air power, and that air power is enabled by airmen logisticians. It's proved to be an enormous strength that, and I think Patricia Knighton is here in the audience somewhere. I saw her last night. Her father, General Marquez, famously said that, that logistics is not the tail, it's the jawbone that holds the teeth. And it's true, because if you think about all the combat capability that exists, that we have, and the great videos that we show, it's only enabled by you and the airmen that you lead. 80 years ago, on D-Day for Operation Overlord, the Army Air Corps flew 14,000 sorties in a day. So imagine the fuel, maintenance, parts. Think of all the planning that was required to pull that off the first time the world had ever seen that. Nearly 75 years ago, the US and allies flew over 250,000 missions into Berlin. At the peak of that airlift on Easter Sunday in 1949, there was a plane landing in Berlin every 45 seconds. 152, that's 13,000 tons. 152 C-17s in a day. That's how many loads we were talking about in very small, compared to what we're used to today, airplanes. So the C-54s were retrofitted, pulling passenger seats out, enabling cargo to go in, which required maintainers to make those modifications, supply teams to make the changes not only for the airplane, but to enable continuous flying operations to keep civilians alive, cut off from resources. A coalition of field and depot maintenance teams keeping aircraft availability up. Robust ground operations that reduce the turn time to refuel, load, unload aircraft. I don't think it was called port operations at the time, but think about the orchestration of ground operations that was required to enable that air operation. Those innovative approaches were seen by the world, and what they saw was air power can be responsive in a time of need at a level that's unprecedented in any other domain. The responsiveness was remarkable, and it actually shaped where the Air Force went in its early days. So we can fast forward in history and watch other examples of how logistics was the key to American air power. It's interesting to me, when I was a lieutenant, it was only 15 years after the year we had left Vietnam. And so every senior NCO when I was a lieutenant in my first assignment had a Vietnam service ribbon. That was very common. It was 15 years before. It's longer ago now to a lieutenant to 9/11 than it was to Vietnam when I got commissioned. And when I reflected on that, when I was talking to a lieutenant last night, it makes you think about the context and how important the Air Force has changed over time, and we shouldn't walk past, especially what happened right after 9/11. There were many, many, many airfields open with very little notice and zero planning, very little protection, and immediately Operation Enduring Freedom was born out of a need that this nation saw. The flexibility that airmen demonstrated in those early days and then determined through the next 20 years in Afghanistan was absolutely remarkable. The ingenuity to generate power, air power, over and over again in unfamiliar circumstances was absolutely incredible. There are many in this room that did a lot of that. And there are many in this room that are now leading, if you're really junior, senior NCOs that did that. I'd encourage you to ask them about it and get their reflections on what they learned there. 2 years ago, in the much more recent past, airmen executed the largest non-combatant air evacuation in history, saving 124,000 civilians. They did that with almost non-existent infrastructure. They did that in an increasingly dangerous and hostile condition in Kabul. Those airmen that kept the planes fueled, maintained, loaded, protected, saved thousands of lives. It's not hyperbole. The relentless commitment to readiness is what made that possible in the first place. Airmen can do amazing things if you give them the tools to do it. There was a lot of work that was done before that put the airplanes in place, the training, the exercises, the pushing down authority to a lower level, the captains making decisions. Sometimes we'll talk about, we'll listen to a general or somebody else talk about senior leaders making decisions. Jimmy Doolittle was a lieutenant colonel when he did the raid that we all know his name for. So it doesn't have to be a real senior leader. It has to be a leader that's making the call. So through that commitment, and there's many other examples that have shaped nations and our global environment, airmen have been there. General Alvin, our chief, recently said that how we implement change really matters. And it's different times, and I talked a little bit at the beginning about in the 1990s, we had a dramatic reduction in the defense budget, and at the end of the Cold War, there were significant changes. That's how we got to that 250,000 less airmen on active duty than when I was commissioned. So we pivoted to be more efficient because we needed to. The decisions that were made at the time were, how do we support a rotational requirement to the Middle East that we didn't know when the finish line for that would be, and we haven't reached that finish line yet. But we had to become more efficient to rotate through for now plus 30 years in a rotational environment. The decisions that were made then had to be made for the reasons they were. We needed to change, and we did. We need to change now, and we will. So the largely and I say largely because it was not completely uncontested, but the largely air uncontested environment that we had in the Middle East over that 25 plus years, and that enabled us to have just-in-time logistics is not our future. I knew I was deployed at the time, and if I needed a part for an airplane, I knew that the entire Air Force would do whatever was required to get that one part for that one airplane. And it was really just the time it took to go from its origin to destination. It was transportation time. It was literally just the time in the airplane that was getting it there. That was for a small subset of our force, and there was nobody shooting at the airplane that was bringing the part in. That's not the future that we live in. The assumptions that were underpinned 30 years ago are not the ones that we can make in our future. They're not actually the ones we can make for today. So we need to restructure our logistics processes to generate the readiness, redesign our concepts of support. It is interesting to me when I think about the exercises of the old days, where we were still doing some exercises that were kind of preparing for a Soviet-level threat. And then as we changed our exercise regime and in the counter-VEO environment, we significantly, we spent time on the rotational model. I had a chief when I was at Bagram, and he was on his 8th deployment to Bagram. 8 times. Now, he said, hey, it's changed from 2002, I think was his first one, all throughout. But there's a difference in going to the same place and it changing some, and then being able to form your team once you get there, versus going to a place you've never been and having to be a team when you arrive. And that's our future. So we were calibrated for a different era, and we're going to have to recalibrate again. So we've got some good history moments that show us that we've been able to do this in the past, and so now we will do it again. Motivation is crystal clear. We need to be ready to deter, because that's what we want to do. But if deterrence fails, prevail in conflict. So we're going to talk a little bit about the reoptimization initiatives that the Air Force is undergoing right now. The Secretary announced the GPC themes, and these are captured in the Case for Change document that I talked about and encourage you to read. But there's 4 themes, essentially. Develop people, generate readiness, project power, and develop capabilities. So develop people. On develop people, there's 3 big themes there that you've heard some about and you will learn more on. Can we go to the slide that shows develop people? Thank you. So creation of Airman Development Command, officer and enlisted tracks, and IT and cyber warrant officer highlights this theme. Probably have a lot of questions on this. What I would describe to you is these are the decisions that have been made that were going to happen. The details of the how, that's being worked on right now by your MAGCOMs. There's leaders from every MAGCOM working on teams for all 4 of these right now. So develop people is the first one. Let's go to the next one. Generate readiness. So generating readiness, we need to streamline command structures to achieve high levels through large-scale exercises, simulations, and mission-centric training. So a little bit on the generating readiness. The readiness for what is often the question that you'll be asked and I get asked. And why change? I haven't met a person yet that thinks that we can nibble around the edges of what we've done for the last 30 years and significantly be ready for something different. It's going to require generating a level of readiness that's not episodic, where we can have a subset of our force ready on a rotational basis when we know we need to have it ready, it's fundamentally different. That's going to require a lot within logistics. That's going to require a prioritization of weapon systems, our processes for resourcing weapon systems, the health of the shelf to start with, readiness spares kits that are ready for the sortie duration and the rate that'll be required. We have a lot of work to do in this area. Let's go to the next one, please. Projecting power. So unit of action. And I get asked this question sometimes, what is this thing you speak of called a unit of action? The unit of action is the team that shows up, that's trained together as a team and not showing up. Many in this room that have deployed show up, and I detected this in a couple of different times where everybody comes in and you have kind of a dip in performance sometimes. People need to know each other. They need to learn each other's strengths and weaknesses, figure out, okay, what's the process here at this base in the deployed location. And after a couple weeks, typically, and I tracked this rotation after rotation, I'd watch it, there was a dip, and then it would come up, and it's almost like water skiing. If you've ever water skied, you're down in the water, and the getting up is the hard part. It's kind of a struggle. It takes more energy than it should, and if you're older like me, it would take a lot more energy than it should. But in that struggle of getting up, once you're up on plane, it's working much better. And my observation, anyway, was that's the way a lot of deployment rotations are. It's the struggle in the water. It's taken a lot. But once you're up, it's going well, because now everything's coordinated and it's working the way it's designed to work. On the project power and unit of action piece, before we had the opportunity to have that, I'll call it dip in performance, when everybody could figure out whose first name is what and who works with who, and we would do that in CENTCOM. And there are notable exceptions, but for the most part, it has worked for us. That does not work against a peer that it can attack you from the air. You have to show up as a team, and that's what a unit of action is about. So we'll establish deployable combat wings, in-place combat wings, and combat generation wings. So the fourth theme, develop capabilities, is to conceive, design, and deliver connected weapon systems. Many times you'll be frustrated, frankly, because you'll go, hey, why doesn't this system talk to this other system that are all in the Air Force? And it's a valid point. So we need to change where we're going in the future and mesh that by systems so we have a capability, not disparate weapon systems. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. Let's go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So when we re-optimize for great power competition, all these things I'm talking about have different applicability if you're in a flight, a squadron, in a wing somewhere, in a MAGCOM staff, on a joint staff. And if you're asking, okay, what does it mean to me? That's the right question. The answer is not fully available yet. The decision of what to do is there. The how is where we need your help. The how is you talking to your boss. If you're on one of the teams that's looking at this, you have a responsibility to ask the field, what do you think was important for us to address? So they all matter. At the Air Staff, we're working it, the MAGCOMs are working it, and the Joint Community is working it. But it would completely be disingenuous for me to talk about this like you haven't been working on this, because you have. This is not so much a sprint where we're in the chalks and we've just started. This is more like a relay race where you've already been running in many areas that I just talked about. And we're taking the baton from a race you're already running. And I want to highlight some of those just to reinforce that you're already running and learning things right now things to do, as importantly, things not to do that we need to hear from you on. So across logistics, we're leveraging many of the lines of effort that you've spent time on. For example, you've changed the concept of support for ACE. The decision support tools, so think about it for a minute. You know, the A in ACE is agile. So as you think about being disaggregated and spread out and not being able to see all the people that are under your leadership, all the weapon systems, all the equipment, because it's disaggregated, that requires a different decision support tool for you to make key decisions, to have awareness of where things are, to know the condition of them. This is the thing you hear us talk about called decision advantage. The decision advantage is you have to have the awareness and you have to make sense of what you're being told so that you can make the decision. It doesn't mean that a machine necessarily makes the decision, but we should have airmen making decisions, not uber great spreadsheets. You know, and we love spreadsheets in logistics. You know, I have met some, PhD level spreadsheet, and I'm kind of love spreadsheets myself, to be fair. But that doesn't give us the decision support capability to make decisions at the scale we're going to have to make them. Agile combat employment is the schema maneuver. But how do we do the support concept broader than just the hub and spoke that we talk about a lot? So rapid disaggregation and reaggregation is important. And this is the relay piece. Many of your units have lightened the footprint, have thought about how do you get smaller? How can you do the mission, not from a manpower savings perspective, but its number of seats on Chalk 1 and Chalk 2. And what are the specialties within those human beings that are going to be on Chalk 1 and Chalk 2 to go do that capability? All that's not being done in a headquarters. That's being done in the field where you work. So our logisticians, engineers, and defenders have to arrive as a team. That arriving as a team means you touch down at the forward location, defend it, recover the airfield if required, get immediate access to pre-positioned material, and plug into a command C2 network. To launch, recover, refuel, reload, and launch again, then move to another location and do that all over again. That's very different than a static location where it's a rotation over and over again. It requires completely different C2. It's actually a whole lot more complicated. It's actually a whole lot more exciting, to be frank with you. And as you think about problem solving, you're in this room because you want to be a better logistician. And that's the most important thing. That desire to be better is something nobody can give you. You've got it. So if you have that, and you do, because you're here, then what's the next thing you need? You need a super hard problem to solve. I've got one for you, and it's this. The complicated C2 aspect, it's gonna make allocation and reallocation decisions that much more important. I have not yet met the commander that says, hey, I've got everything I need, I've got all the resources, I've got all the airmen, I've got all the equipment, don't need anything here. Every commander I've met will describe that, hey, I've got some of what I need, and I've got the talent, I've got the smart airmen that know how to solve the problem, but I need more from that enterprise, and I don't possess it all myself. So how if that field commander is the surgeon, let's say, and they're putting their hand out for the scalpel, the enterprise is who puts that scalpel in their hand, and it may be that that scalpel needs to come from another location. So how do we decide where to tee that up to pull the piece of support equipment, the R11, that you fill in the blank with whatever that resource the commander needs? How do we decide where to do that from? There's no zero risk decision there. But if we make everything a clunky, my boss is going to talk to your boss, and we're going to schedule the secure VTC a week from now, and we're going to arm wrestle over who's going to get it, we have lost. We can't do that. We're process mapping by class of supply all the authorities to have that decision. Now, in the end, a decision is going to be made by a human being. And when that decision is made, we're going to execute that play. But if we're spending our time in a clunky spreadsheet, disparate, I have to log into that system, and we have to schedule secure VTCs for generals to arm wrestle over it, we've lost the advantage. That's the opposite of decision advantage. So what are we going to do to solve that? We're going to put tools in your hand where you know the count, the kind, the condition of all the material. You can look at, and many of the MAGCOMs are doing this right now in Blade. You can look at the condition of the material, airfield conditions, fuel stores, all the things that need to go into that decision-making process. I think once the senior leader, the leader, sees all of that, then they can make the decision with confidence. The tools that I've seen, and 3 MAGCOMs right off the top, they're moving out aggressively. Certainly, PACAF, AMC, and ACC, or USAFE, have been working this hard, but all the MAGCOMs are participating in it. And the chief, General Alvin, the chief, says, he kind of recharacterizes common operating picture into user-defined operating picture. And I think the reason he wants to do that is common operating picture means, at least in my mind, hey, this is the standard, this is the view you get of all those things I was describing before. And if you got to squint a little bit to see what you need to see, okay. But if you don't see it the way you need to see the data to make decisions, we have a tendency to make our own thing, which could be that way exquisite Excel spreadsheet, because we don't like the way it's being presented to us, so let's change it. So the sophistication has progressed. It can be user-defined. You can, in Blade, say, yep, don't need to look at that, don't need to look at that, really need to look at that in a different way. And by giving you that, it's pulling from authoritative sources in a secure environment. You can look in a digital environment with no lag in information, and then you can have that high confidence. So airmen can create a Blade account. You can get a builder license, and you can get it here at a booth at LOA. Let me give you another example of what you personally and what the leadership teams across your MAGCOMs are doing today. This is another part of the relay race. After we had a pretty remarkable event with the senior leaders of the Air Force at a Corona. And after that, we got the task of, hey, we need you to look at a set the theater integration team to think about setting the theater. And we recharacterized that as set the theaters, plural. There is a pacing theater, no doubt. But the global environment we talked about means we can't ignore the whole globe for one, even though it's a really big part of the Earth. It's a global environment. So we have a set the theaters integration team that's looking at how do we procure kit, interim staging base, and deliver capabilities, not just a bunch of commodities, to a field commander. When we do the dynamic environment for the global threat that we're seeing right now, we have to think set the theaters. Let's go to the next slide, please. So there's a lot of airmen in this room, some on active duty, some retired, but whether you're a lieutenant or a lieutenant general, you learn from chiefs and you've been shaped by chiefs. And I'm exactly the same way you are. So I want to ask our senior enlisted leader from half A4, Chief Barrier, to join me out here and give you a couple of other updates about things he's seen with your peers. So Chief, over to you.
There we go. So to be fair, I was told there was only going to be about 100 people here today, so I feel like I'm at a disadvantage. But good morning, logistics professionals. Today I get to do one of my favorite things I get to do as a chief. I'm not going to tell war stories. I'm not going to talk about tea times. I'm not going to brag about how tough it was back in my day. Today I get to talk about airmen. And I get to talk about the amazing things they're doing across our Air Force. Specifically, I get to brag about our total force airmen, civilians, joint partners, and how they're driving change that ensures we're positioned to meet tomorrow's challenges head on. Change is inevitable, and often it's a catalyst for growth. We all experience transitions, whether it be in our personal life, whether it be technology, whether it be the jobs that we work in. Change happens whether we like it or not. And as the saying goes, the only constant in life is change. One key aspect to adjusting to change is mindset. Maintaining a positive outlook to where we can look at not what's being lost, but what can be gained. Adaptability is another aspect. Being adaptable means staying open to new methods, to new ways of learning, and new ways to combat the unexpected. So let's not forget the power of collaboration, and we'll talk about that a little bit in some of our airmen examples. But change often involves working with others and helping them navigate the waters that you're swimming as well. Supporting one another, fostering a collaborative environment, all of these things can make that journey a little bit smoother. Change fosters innovation, another constant in our Air Force DNA. And whether we're talking about the Berlin airlift, things that we did during GWAT for 20 plus years, or the airmen examples we're going to share today. Starting with Tech Sergeant Emil Wadika, a flight line expediter from Lake and Heath. Emil spent much of 2023 working on a reimagined weapons management system cover design. At first glance, this probably doesn't seem like a complex innovation, but it's one that's paid great dividends for our Air Force. The current design is pretty clunky and cumbersome. Weapons management switch covers on F-35s are a significant FOD hazard. They generally just go unused. Case in point, the Air Force experiences about 1,000 hours of NMC aircraft annually due specifically to that weapons management switch cover. The current cover, the one that Emil and his team have worked on, is in its 10th iteration out of the React Additive Manufacturing Lab at Tinker. Tech Sergeant Wadika and his teammates Caleb McBride and Josh Hunter have been getting after it to improve that design, impacting innovation, strategic innovation starting with the tactical level. So let's talk about Master Sergeant Adam Rowland. He's a munitions expert who teamed with AFWorks, and he worked through a massive software upgrade, leading 5 21-member teams through an upgrade. Not only did he tackle this huge software upgrade, he's been the technical expert in a $15 million warehousing automation effort, one that's eventually going to save his community over 50,000 hours when fully realized. Over a 3-year period, Master Sergeant Rowland has helped expand this project to 3 different MAJCOMs, getting after the SECAF's operational imperatives 5 and 7. To pile on just a little bit further, Adam was handpicked to partner with Lockheed Martin during a major TO overhaul. Adam authored 5 significant changes impacting first-of-its-kind changes for the hypersonic program milestones. His efforts have not gone unnoticed. I mean, we're talking about him here at LOA today, so that counts for something. But he's also been recognized by SimSAF 19, Lockheed Martin leadership, and his career field manager during the most recent Senior Munitions Manager Conference. So let's talk about another Global Strike pro, Andrew Cherry. Senior Master Sergeant Cherry, a munitions modernization superintendent at Global Strike, developed and drafted the requirement for a multi-weapons system rotary launcher maintenance stand. I know there's a mouthful. He guided engineers by designing a multi-capable stand that supports B-2s, B-52s, and B-21s, putting our Air Force in a position to save over $18 million and 1,000 work hours annually across 5 locations. Senior Master Sergeant Cherry continued to drive change for our Air Force. He partnered with the StrikeWorks team to set up a cadet fellowship internship program within Global Strike, working with 7 colleges across 5 states. He ensured ROTC cadet travel to Barksdale. When they got to Barksdale, they were assigned 11 significant Global Strike problem sets to work during the 3-month period they were there, furthering our innovative ecosystem, one airman at a time. So moving on to our civilian airmen. specifically item managers and engineers, throughout the A4 enterprise and organic industrial base, as they are tirelessly working to solve obsolescence and asset availability issues. Working with Global Strike, the system program office, logisticians, material managers, maintainers, and our civilian logistics leaders within the 448th Supply Chain Management Wing addressed a significant B2 mission degradation issue. By overcoming diminishing manufacturing resources, the team mitigated supply chain issues by developing new welding and new repair procedures on B2 heat exchangers. Not only were the parts delivered to the shelves on time and under cost and ahead of schedule, the 509th Bomb Wing at Whiteman Air Force Base was able to install these heat exchangers quicker and more efficiently than they had in the past. Their efforts reduced lead times by over 1,000 days, resolved over 50,000 MICAP hours, and enabled B2 mission generation. So now we're going to talk about some team stuff, specifically our LRS teammates at Nellis Air Force Base. So from scratch, they developed a mission-ready airman course well before the Air Force provided any guidance on it. And in this course, they prepared airmen with combat log R roles, roles that we'd see in the expeditionary environment, and roles that would ask our airmen to generate sorties with a minimal footprint. Students at Nellis Air Force Base spend 30 days in this class, and when they're done with that, they have the opportunity to move forward, deploy to a simulated austere environment, and put their skills to use. The Nellis Air Force Base airmen are revolutionizing how we train and operate in a contested environment, and they're reducing the footprint required to generate sorties while they're at it. They are definitely using their innovative efforts to mature our combat capabilities. So moving on to our joint partners, and I know I'm hurrying, guys, I apologize. Logistics is inherently joint and increasingly combined, especially within our allies. From the air staff to MAGCOM to wings, we are working to deepen logistics interoperability in all aspects of what we do. For instance, from the staff perspective, we're pushing integrated logistics, maintenance, munitions into combined exercises, and we're doing it by reducing some of the redundant and maybe archaic policies that would prevent us from getting after it. In January, case in point, our Royal Australian Air Force aviators and airmen met together at Nellis Air Force Base for Red Flag. Combat training exercises like Red Flag provide an opportunity for us and our allies to train together and work towards a common goal. As depicted here, joint training on munitions is one of the many ways the U.S. and our allies can face the pacing challenge against advancing threats. All right, last one. We can advance the slide. So this one's really important to me. I'm going to, for brevity purposes, I'm just going to refer to as Tech Sergeant HC. So I've known HC for a really long time. So while stationed at the 502nd LRS at JBSA, she created something called the APRT, the Automated Passenger Reservation Tool. It's a low-code desktop app that allows airmen transparency when they're preparing to PCS, and this is really important for our folks going overseas. APRT allows airmen to make travel reservations remotely through a desktop app rather than make that in-person visit to TMO. And it's had an impact. It's been used for over 21,000 reservations across 39 installations. If Tech Sergeant HC looks familiar, it's because she should. She was on this stage last year being recognized as an Aether Sprint finalist. She's now part of the IMSC team down in San Antonio, where she serves as a Tesseract field agent. She uses her skills to assist other airmen on their innovation journey. Tech Sergeant HC had great success to this point, but she's not done. She's taken the lessons learned and developing innovators across the Air Force, growing the innovative ecosystem we need to be successful for tomorrow's challenges. Change is a constant force in logistics, and we all know that to be true. By adopting a positive mindset, cultivating adaptability, fostering collaboration, and in the instances of Senior Master Sergeant Cherry and Tech Sergeant HC, paying it forward, we can navigate the winds of transformation with resilience. Secretary Kendall said it best: change is hard, but losing is unacceptable. And I wholeheartedly agree. Change is hard, but with the actions of our innovative airmen, or total force airmen, civilians, and joint partners, losing won't be hard, losing will be impossible. Thank you, sir.
So I'm glad Chief Barrier got the chance to describe that to you. It does a lot better job of describing it as a relay race that you're already running. Seeing some concrete examples like that, and you may know some of those great airmen that were just on the screen, but you know examples that weren't described on the screen too. So there's no time to wait. and you haven't waited. We can't predict the future, and I know that this time of consequence and the fact that we are out of time weighs on you. But it doesn't weigh you in a crushing way. It weighs on you in a motivational way. And make no mistake, the airmen of today are going to make the difference for tomorrow. I've heard the saying a number of times. I think the first time I heard it was just a couple of years ago, that air power is the reason, and air power is the answer, and airmen are the reason. And when you peel that apart a little bit, the enabling piece of air power are the airmen in this room and the ones you lead. It's a discipline. I love the way the video right before Chief and I walked out describes it as a profession, a discipline. What do you do in a profession or a discipline? You want to get better at it. If you go to a doctor, you hope that doctor is thinking about the latest innovations that are available. They're collaborating with their cohorts to say, hey, what are you thinking about? What's working? What's not working? And they're pushing to be better at that profession, at that discipline. That's what you're doing here. It doesn't just have to happen here. It can happen at your base. It can happen in your chapter. It can happen with 20 people and a bowl of chips and a discussion on a Friday afternoon, but it needs to happen. This is not an easy way of life, but it's a rewarding one. It's something your country needs you to do, and that discipline makes the difference in warfighting. So that's a little bit on where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And there's nothing that is more motivational than seeing a glimpse of airmen doing that every day from your peers. You're here because you want to be better at your discipline, and that's the most critical factor in your success. I think as you think through the LOA experience you have at home station, and whether this is the first symposium you've gone to or you've been to many, I want you to think about, why does this organization last for so long? There's many of the leaders in this room have led it through some turbulent times. But I've asked myself over the years, why does it have this following? And it's because the product that this organization pushes is professional development. And no matter who you are, you can get behind that. And it's never ending, because the world's changing. And I think when you look at the content that you have, starting off from today and through the next couple of days, really starting with LOA University, that's the thing that will make you that better logistician. You're learning, you're exchanging ideas, you're doing thoughtful debate with each other, you're connecting. That makes you the airman that we need as an Air Force. So thank you for what you're doing every day. The Chief and I look forward to talking to each of you this week. Logistics has been the strength of American air power. It's going to stay that way because of the people we're looking at in this room. Thank you.